Looking at our world from a theological perspective. This is the Theology Central Podcast, making theology central.
Good afternoon, everyone. I apologize for that. I could not find the button to turn everything on. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. It is Friday. You can tell, right? It's Friday, August the 11th, 2023. It is currently 4:57 p.m. Central Time, and I'm coming to you live from the Theology Central studio located right here in West Texas, right here in Abilene, Texas, to be very specific. Maybe I should just say West Texas. Maybe that would sound more mysterious. Maybe then people would not have maybe be able to try to locate me. Maybe I should just say from somewhere. Maybe I should just become more and more vague about where I'm broadcasting from. But no, everyone, I'm coming to you live from the Theology Central studio located right here in Abilene, Texas. And I know I probably shouldn't. But I feel this overwhelming urge to begin a brand new series. Oh, I know I shouldn't. I know we've got enough to do. We've got the ongoing study of the book of Jeremiah. We've got the ongoing series on law and gospel. There's always other things that we're working on and should be working on and could be doing. But I just feel with all of our discussion about law and gospel, and making sure we understand the proper distinction between law and gospel. Whenever you have that discussion about, no, that's law, this is gospel, inevitably, in fact, it occurred. You're going to be accused of being an antinomian. You're going to be accused of easy believism. You're going to be accused of whatever. Because if you know you're not preaching the gospel right until you are accused of antinomianism. How do you want to know if you're preaching the gospel right? You're accused of antinomianism. How do you want to know you're preaching the gospel right? You're going to be accused of easy believism. How do you want to know you're preaching the gospel right? Is because people will not be able to understand it because by nature, people are works-based. They are law-based. And if they hear that we are saved by grace alone, through faith alone, because of Christ alone, if they hear that we're saved by an imputed righteousness, right? Not an infused righteousness, that I stand before God perfect and holy and righteous because of that imputed righteousness. And therefore you cannot judge my salvation based off what I do, because my salvation is determined by what Christ did. You can't look to my actions. You look to the perfection of Christ. If I tell you, don't look to see if you do this or this or this or this to be saved, because Christ did all of that for you. As soon as you start trying to preach that and teach that and explain that, it's not going to be long before someone's like, you're an antinomian. You're teaching a watered down gospel. You're making an excuse for sin, and immediately the accusations will come. So I think it's time to try to add a different layer to everything that we're doing. In some ways, this should be a part of the Law and Gospel series, but it's going to be Law and Gospel adjacent. It's going to be connected to it because it's going to offer discussion and a sense about something that I think most Christians are concerned with, and that is, how should we live? How should our Christianity impact us? What does God expect us to do as Christians? Right? Christians do a lot of talking about what we do and what we don't do and what we should and shouldn't, and the commandments and the law and all of those types of things. Now, I think in many cases, they obliterate the gospel. They destroy the gospel and they replace the gospel with nothing more than law. But then they dress up the law, pretending that it's gospel, when in reality, all it is law. You can go back and listen to our ongoing discussion. But I think it's time to add this other part to all of this. And I hope that you will be more than willing to listen and to consider and to think and to work through this with us. And I hope you'll be willing to now. And so many of these studies, I always give you work. I give you assignments. That's what I always do in everything, right? I hand you things to do. Now, the problem with doing that is that many people will not participate. They won't do the work. But yet they still want to form an opinion. They don't want to do the work, but they want to be able to make authoritative, dogmatic declarations, declarative statements. But you have to do the work. So hopefully you'll be willing to do a little bit of the work. Now, where should we start? Let's start in 1 Corinthians chapter 1. Let's start in 1 Corinthians chapter 1. And I want you to look carefully at verse 30. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 30. Now, the context here, I think, is well worth time to read, but we won't right now. I just want you to write down 1 Corinthians 1:30. You ready? Here we go. But of him are ye in Christ Jesus, who of God is made unto us. So we are in Christ Jesus. By faith, we are in Christ Jesus. And God has made Christ unto us wisdom, righteousness, sanctification, and redemption. That according as it is written, he that glorieth, let him glory in the Lord. Well, you know why you should not glory in yourself? You know why you should not glory in anything else? Because Christ is wisdom. Christ is your Christ is your wisdom. He is your righteousness. He is your sanctification. He is your redemption. So therefore you should not look to yourself. You should not glory. You should not boast in anything you do. Christ is your wisdom. Christ is your sanctification. Christ is your righteousness. Christ is your redemption. Now, we definitely have talked a lot about Christ being our righteousness, right? That's imputed righteousness. Why am I perfectly righteous? Because I'm in Christ. Christ is my righteousness. So if someone says, well, if you do this and you do this and you do this, you're not a Christian, I can say, well, look to Christ. Christ didn't do any of these things. Therefore, I'm perfectly righteous. So therefore, I'm saved because of what I am in Christ, not by some test that you give me because you got it from some other pastor. But Christ is also our sanctification. Sanctification. So we are about to begin a series on sanctification. Now, as usual, this will not follow the standard way that Christian podcasters and churches and pastors do things. We know we're going to take that template and throw it away. We're going to blow that template up and it's going to be our own unique approach, right? Now, we are going to use one specific thing as kind of a starting place. We're going to use at least one thing as kind of a starting place, but we'll use a lot of the things that I typically do in my series. We're going to be reviewing some audio because this is interesting. Why we started talking about sanctification. Okay, well, I've already kind of given somewhat of a hint, right? Because we've been spending so much time about law and gospel, and immediately someone accused you of being an antinomian. And so then I'm like, okay, well, then let's talk about this aspect of how should we live? But there's two other reasons why I thought this is the time to do the series. One, many of you know that I subscribe to a lot of the Lifeway Bible studies. Their Sunday school literature, their small group literature, their study guides, not their literature. Their small group curriculum, I should say that. Their study guides for small groups and for Sunday school. Right? We've been using one for Jeremiah this summer, correct? Well, the other one is called Bible Studies for Life, and their summer 2023 personal study guide. Study one was mentoring, right? I wasn't that interested in it. I will go back and read it, but I just wasn't super interested in it. But study two, as soon as I picked this up, again, this is the personal study guide, Bible Studies for Life from Lifeway. This is the summer 2023 study guide. Study two. Set apart a life lived for God. A life lived for God. All right. I think that's going to be interesting. And then on page 66 of the study, it says this. The emphasis in this study is on sanctification. Oh, look at that. All right. So now I got two reasons to possibly talk about sanctification. Then the other night, I don't know, maybe it was sometime this week, I got a notification on one of my podcast apps that for In Touch Ministries, the ministry of the late Dr. Charles Stanley, that Dr. Charles Stanley, they're using his obviously past messages. They are starting a series on sanctification. I'm like, wow. So I got a podcast series here on sanctification starting. I got a study guide here. We're studying law and gospel. Okay. That's just, I'm not gonna just ignore it. We're gonna do it. We're gonna talk about sanctification. And I don't know where it's gonna end up. I don't even really have it mapped out, which again is typical for us. So obviously we'll be grabbing some of that audio from Dr. Charles Stanley. Now, are we going to agree with all of it? Absolutely not. But it will give us that perspective. Obviously, I've got the study guide here. They're going to be talking about sanctification. Am I going to agree with it? Absolutely not. But it will give us a second perspective. And then we'll do our own typical things that we do here on the Theology Central podcast. And then we'll create some hypotheses. We'll test them. We'll challenge them. We'll do work. We'll do assignments. It should be fun, and it will hopefully will add to everything else that we are doing. So I hope you will participate. I promise you this. I will limit the assignments. Now, I've been given a lot of assignments lately on Jeremiah, or at least some. Hopefully people are still participating in our Bible study exercise on Jeremiah. But I think that this will be beneficial and helpful. And I think it so is connected to so many. If you even consider Jeremiah, I mean, what have we seen in Jeremiah over and over and over? Law, 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 law. So we've had these, again, intense discussions about the proper distinction between law and gospel. But that always leads someone going, so what are you saying? Are you saying just do whatever you want? And whenever you try to explain, they get worried because they look, the reality is they will throw out the gospel as long as they can make sure they can tell people that they're not saved and tell people what they are to do and not do and condemn some people. I hate to say that, but that's really how the church operates sometimes. So there's enough going on that I think this study fits into the middle of all of it. I don't think it will add too much of a burden. I think it will add to what we've been doing and maybe just help us move. I mean, because now, look, we're looking at the end of 2023. I mean, it's fast approaching. Before we know it, we're going to be saying hello to 2024. So let's try to end 2023 with as many important studies and topics as we can. And I think most Christians misunderstand sanctification. Personally, I think they do. That's my own personal feelings. You may disagree, but I can guarantee you this. You will hear the standard approach to sanctification as presented by most. We will review multiple sermons on the subject if we need to, but I guarantee you, you will hear the standard, but then you'll hear me challenge the standard teaching on sanctification. You will hear me offer a different perspective, and hopefully it will be okay. So let's start with this. I'm going to put down for our key verse, I'm going to go with the 1 Corinthians 1:30 passage, right? 30 and 31. But of him are ye in Christ Jesus, who of God is made unto us wisdom and righteousness and sanctification and redemption. I want you to just make sure you have this down as a foundational principle. You are sanctified in Christ Jesus because Jesus is your sanctification. Now, I know you're saying, well, wait a minute. What does that mean practically? I just want to start right there with that fundamental principle. In fact, I'm going to read 1 Corinthians 1:30 from a different translation. I'm going to lean down here and pick it up just because I'm just curious to see how they handle it. And I just have a different translation laying right here on the floor. So let's look at it really quick. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 30. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 30. It starts this way. It is from him that you are in Christ Jesus, who became wisdom from God for us, our righteousness, sanctification, and redemption, in order that, as it is written, let the one who boasts, boast in the Lord. Look, Christ is your sanctification. Christ is your sanctification. Don't boast. Christ is your righteousness. Don't boast. Christ is your wisdom. Don't boast. Now, immediately, that should tell you theologically that there's obviously a positional aspect to sanctification. What other aspect you may be thinking of? We need a foundational place to start. So I'm going to say 1 Corinthians 1, 30 and 31 we're going to put that down as our key verse for now. We could change that at any point. But I don't think that's where most people would start with a study on sanctification. I don't think they would start with 1 Corinthians 30 and 31. I think they would start somewhere else. That's my guess. I could be wrong, but I think most studies don't start there. So foundationally, I just want to go ahead and start right there. Now, let's at least get a definition. Now, we're going to pull this definition not from the study guide, not from Charles Stanley, not from any other source right now. We're going to go to a completely separate source from all of those. Let's go to Theopedia.com. Theopedia.com, and we read this as a definition. Sanctification, or in its verbal form, sanctify, literally means to set apart for special use or purpose. That is to make holy or sacred. Therefore, sanctification refers to the state or process of being set apart, made holy. Now, please note, the state or process. I'm going to argue that sanctification is a position and a process. It is a state and a process. It's both. In one sense, you are sanctified, done. In another sense, you are being sanctified. And in another sense, you will be. I think that there is a completed aspect to it. There's an ongoing aspect, and there is a future aspect. So I think in sanctification,